everybody. Welcome to day 3 of our forum. I see it's still a bit gloomy in Durban.
Morning.
Morning, morning, morning. It's
Morning,
rainy.
everybody.
Derek, that's East London, isn't it? Is it raining in East London? Is that good news? I think it's that Oudtshoorn area that is so terribly, terribly dry. It is a beautiful autumn day, another wet Bloemfontein. It's a beautiful autumn morning in Cape Town, a beautiful autumn morning. So welcome. Can we believe that it's already day 3? Tomorrow, our last day of our long-awaited forum. We hope you all had a good afternoon yesterday. And I think unless there's any urgent housekeeping from Chanel or any other urgent issues for this beautiful day where we're focusing on caring for our institutions and caring for our practice, caring for the work that we do and how we do the work that we do. I'm reminded of a quote. This has now just suddenly jumped into my mind, so I'm thinking I meant to share it. When you get to my age, you start wondering whether your life had any meaning or significance, or whether you've done what you're supposed to be doing. And I came across this beautiful quote by Maya Angelou, the wonderful African-American poet, who said that success is liking yourself, liking what you do, and how you do it. And I thought that was such a beautiful definition of success. Liking yourself. Whew, that's a hard one. We spent some time yesterday morning connecting in with ourselves, liking ourselves. And then liking what we do, which is our passion, our commitment to this work, and then also how we do it, because how we do it is inextricably linked in with what it is that we're doing and how we might be staying true to our own values and how we might be staying true to the vision and the values of the organizations and the institutions that we're a part of. So today, we've got this beautiful overarching theme of caring and sharing, a beautiful overarching theme. And today our caring and our sharing is about our institutions and about our practice. So before we then go into the check-in groups for this morning, we're going to have our creative offering. And Chanel, can I proceed with that? There's no other urgent housekeeping.
No,
So
I think someone just shared their screen, but yeah,
someone shared their screen.
Ahead.
Okay. So with that, our creative offering this morning is from Marianne Leroux. So Marianne, over to you and welcome. And remember to just introduce yourself as well before you introduce your offering.
Thank you and good morning. Yes, I'm Marianne Leroux. I am based at the National Herbarium in Pretoria, working for Sandy. I'm the eFlora coordinator. Yeah, so that's a little bit of background where I work. And when I'm not at the office, I enjoy music as a hobby. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share something that I'm very passionate about this morning. Yes, so nature inspires the creative mind and also the artistic form of music. And this captivating synergetic interplay between plants and music has long been explored through art and science. Just think back at Disney's Fantasia from the 1940s. If you haven't seen this animated film, please go and have a look on YouTube. The music of Tchaikovsky's ballet, The Nutcracker, is set to a variety of dancing fairies, fishes, flowers, mushrooms, and leaves that personifies the changing of the seasons. And once you've seen this film, you might perhaps imagine the flowers of Namaqualand come alive, keeping you singing and dancing company the next time you're on your plant field trip. And maybe in more recent times, I have another example of where music and science connect. Recently, a Pretoria-based composer created an academic piece of choral music to stimulate conversations and awareness around the red-listed plants of our country. The text of the red list song consists only of scientific names of plant genera, starting with A, B, and continues through to AF. The piece is almost 10 minutes long and was first performed in 2019. However, today I want to showcase a sentimental interplay between choral music and nature by playing a piece entitled With a Lily in Your Hand. The poem is by a Spanish composer, Spanish poet, Lorca. It's translated into English and set to music by the American composer, Eric Whitacre. It forms the second piece of a cycle called The Three Flower Songs. I'm not gonna analyze the poem because Lorca's work is rather complex. But I could maybe just leave you with two thoughts. Lilies generally symbolize femininity, love, devotion, and sometimes grief, depending on the context of culture and location. And in the context of this piece, I think it's probably, it represents death or grief of a loved one. And the butterfly symbolizes resurrection, change, or transformation of the soul into a better life or a different realm. If you listen closely enough, you might hear the butterflies fluttering away into the night sky. So this piece is sung by the Chanticleer Singers, a Joburg-based choir of which I'm a member, and I hope you will enjoy it. Thanks, Chanel.
Wow, Marianne, that was incredible. That was incredible. I'm still kind of just allowing that music to kind of just be present. with me until the universe can fit inside my heart. Wow. Thank you so, so much for sharing that with us. Thank you so much. That was so beautiful. And maybe you can post in the chat, maybe just the Fantasia, just the name again. And also, I know we do have a link to the Red List song. And maybe you can also just post that link in the chat as well for those participants who would like to take 10 quiet moments and go and just see where their passion and their commitment, their science meets the music, meets the art, meets the soul, meets the universe. Thank you very, very much. And some beautiful comments in the chat. Thank you for sharing your gift and your interest with us. Sure. So I think with that beautiful sharing, we're going to go, I think, Chanel, straight into our check-in groups. Are we ready with that? So we're going to share a slide with some check-in questions for everybody. And we'd like this morning for you to spend a good 15 minutes. I see we're already 109 participants, forum participants in the room, one dropped off, 108 members of our NSCF forum, of our NSCF family. So another opportunity to meet and greet and network and get to know and touch each other. So we'll be in groups of 4. Every person has about 3 or 4 minutes. So when we say, we use the term around, and by that we mean that each one has an opportunity to speak without being interrupted. So introduce yourselves first, and then your first question is really to reflect on yesterday. What was a new learning for you or a new insight for you yesterday? We had our self-care sessions in the morning, our wellness sessions in the morning, and then after tea, we had our sessions reflecting on where we're finding ourselves at in our institutions at this time. So what was maybe a new learning? What was maybe a new insight? Or maybe yesterday actually brought forth a question for you, a new question that has opened up for you, that you are holding in your heart this morning. And then the second question, what did yesterday reveal to you about how we are caring for ourselves and how we are caring for our teams? What did it reveal? What did it reveal? So at the end of your sharing, maybe there'll be a few minutes where you could just see what were the common themes, just 1 or 2, if there were any common themes that emerged from your sharing. And then somebody could just post that in the chat for us when Chanel brings you back from your small groups back into the main Zoom room. So with that, also the questions are in the chat. Chanel posted them in the chat for us, a new learning or an insight or a question. And what did yesterday reveal for you about how we are caring for ourselves and how we are caring for our teams? So you will have about 15, 16 minutes, and then we'll meet you back here in the main Zoom room. Chanel will give you a minute's warning. So over to you, Chanel. We might almost all of us be back already. We know that a few people had trouble joining their small groups, but we hope that for the overwhelming majority of you, you had an opportunity to meet some new colleagues and to share some reflections. And of course, it's hard to extrapolate 1 or 2 themes from all that rich sharing. But if there are 1 or 2 themes that struck you, that was common, or that you think is worth capturing, worth sharing with our larger community, please just pop it in the chat. It's so lovely to just glance over at the chat and to just feel that sense of connection with the other 111 people in the room. So please just one phrase, one word, any of the themes that emerged from your check-in, any of the learnings, what was revealed to you. Yeah, some beautiful comments around the self-care. Yes, and about preparedness for the future. I've heard this new term that's used in organizational development world called a pre-mortem. It's quite a challenging term, a pre-mortem, to anticipate those risks and in these uncertain times, how vital communication is. Okay, we'll all be wondering about Bernard's coffee ritual now. We might have to make a special time to hear about that. Yes, caring for yourself is as essential as caring for others. Please keep those reflections and those comments coming. As we orientate ourselves toward today, so can we maybe then have the slide, today's program slide? So there we go. So our theme, as we already mentioned, is caring for our institutions and caring for our practice. And there are two main sessions, session 5 and session 6. Session 5 is what we've already done and learnt. So this is an opportunity for the NSCF to be what we call a community of practice, where we learn from each other's journeys, where we learn from each other's experiments. So this is a very vibrant, wonderful session, what we've done and learnt. In parallel sessions, you can choose to join the KZN Herbarium Transformation Case Study Group, the Ditsong Unsung Heroes exhibition, the innovation session. And for those of you who feel that you would like to have another opportunity to have a courageous conversation around race, transformation, and some other difficult issues in your institution, to reflect on those together, you can join Des and I for a courageous conversation. So the innovation session stays in the main Zoom room. If you want to scroll a bit back on your chat, you will see that there was a lovely posting to give a little bit of background just before Marianne's music. There was a posting by, I think it was by Christina, that gave a little bit of background on the innovation session. So please have a look, some orphan collections, some other innovations. So you can just have a quick look at that. And then we'll have our tea break at 11:45, or maybe at 10:10, or maybe at 11:05 for some groups. And then at 11:15, we'll join again in the main room just to connect with each other before we split into the two parallel sessions, why our work matters. The one session focusing on the research contributions and the other one looking specifically at the use of data in a changing world. And then we'll have our checkout session for the last 15-20 minutes of the day. So that is our program for the day. And the last slide before we go to our parallel sessions is just a reminder of the 3 overarching questions that we are working with in our learning journey. So Chanel, if we can have those 3 overarching questions. So tomorrow when we have our cafe conversations, we're going to spend a bit of time looking at these 3 overarching questions. And the first one, of course, is this question about, is my institution ready to embark on this beautiful, transformative, renewing process of implementing the manual? It's a complex process that is required. And what would create greater readiness or fertility of the soil of our institution to be able to embark together on this process of implementation. What's the work that we need to do around equality, around participation, around agency of staff, and so on. And then secondly, the second question around how do we support one another? How can we collaborate? And also, how can we make best use of the hub team's offerings, the webinars and the support that's coming from the hub team? And the third question, the most critical question, is what is being asked of you at a personal level to step into your leadership in terms of the implementation of this manual, wherever you find yourself. And we've already had some comments yesterday in some of the sessions from junior staff saying we are so committed to this. And at the same time, we're so unsure if space doesn't get made for our voices to come through. We're so unsure how we can step up and offer our leadership in the implementation of this manual. So some profound questions there for us to grapple with. And tomorrow we'll bring those questions together in the cafe conversations. So let me just see, is there any last minute thing at the chat that needs to be taken care of? Okay, so there's just some connections there, the Fantasia, the Red List song, and there's, I think, some more links. So with that, colleagues, everybody other than the people staying to join the innovation session, you need to now physically leave this Zoom room. You've got to hit on the red button that says leave, and you've got to join with a new link, the parallel session that you've chosen. And then that parallel session will take you into tea, and then we'll see you here again after tea at 11:15. We'll see you again in the main Zoom room where you use this main forum link to join. Have a wonderful session, everybody.
And I think we've all had to change the way we do things, and it might actually be good learning for others. So if we can afterwards also discuss other innovations that you might have brought into your collection so that we can all be part of this discussion. Okay. But I'm going to ask Ian to set up our first talk, which is from the McGregor Museum with Beryl Wilson, Adrian Jordan, and Christian Steenkamp. So Adrian and Christian are NSCF data the curation technicians that are employed, and they've been moving between collections to assist with the incorporation of backlogs. And that's why the session is interesting, because later on we're going to speak about the incorporation of orphan collections, but it's actually a very similar process. And these two technicians have brought in quite interesting ideas as well. And I think at the end of it, we'll all be able to learn something about the process of going about incorporating backlogs or orphan collections and what we can learn from others, because it's quite a steep learning curve. I've been through it myself. So thanks to our presenters. I think what I am going to do, since Beryl might have to leave, I'm going to allow discussion after the first talk, if Beryl, if you are still with us, before we go on to the next talk, just so that we have the benefit of your time as well. Okay.
And I mean, we can have Christian and Arjen's talks as well, and then we can have a discussion, if that's okay. Because they basically, I'm just going to give the background to the collection, and then they're going to tell you about what they actually did in the collection for us.
Okay, cool. And then after that, we'll have a discussion while you're still with us. So thank you, guys, and enjoy.
Beryl, before we start, would you like me to give you control of the presentation so you can operate it from your screen?
I think it's going to be safer if you maintain the control, because I keep on getting a message to say unstable connection from the side. So I think there's going to be a delay. All right, so can I start?
Go for it.
Right. Okay. So this is the McGregor Museum in Kimberley. It's the research center for the Northern Cape. And until recently, it was the only research institution in the entire province, which is a third of the size of South Africa. We are now slowly being joined by the newly formed Solplaatje University, which is now only in its 5th year with the Natural Sciences department, but it's a small department because the focus of the university is on human sciences. But this is the building, and originally when I moved in to my job position 34 years ago, the wet collection was actually housed in this old section of the building. And once I'd been there for about 5 or 6 years, they built a new block in the back called the humanities section with new infrastructure, not with half-baked bricks and a wooden frame. And we were able to move the wet collection, which is known as the power herpetological collection, into the back, which is obviously a much safer point of view, because if, it's nothing like putting the most explosive collection in the center of a structure like this. Next slide, please, Ian. Okay, so like I said, we are basically the only depository for the Northern Cape, and as such, they are actively growing collections. I head the zoology department, and I am basically filling the arachnologist, and archaeozoologist, which is quite a diverse portfolio. We only have one collection manager who has been warned that her position at the museum, despite it being a public service position, will be terminated at the end of this year. And they've cited COVID as the reason for that. So public servants are not safe at the moment. I can't express that strong enough. We always to work in, and it's definitely a research hotspot, and it's receiving a lot of attention from other institutions throughout South Africa. Next. All right, so what brought this collection specifically to the attention of the National Science Collections Facility was the report that Michelle put together many years ago. It's now almost 10 years ago, where it was shown that there were a number of natural science collections in South Africa that were under threat. And they looked at various criteria, from human resources to the actual state of the collections, to their holding facilities, to backlogs, or just general lack of staffing, or staffing that was aging. That was the big thing that we noticed, that something like 60% of the staff were within like 15 years of retiring, which was obviously a problem because there's very few successional structures in place. Next. All right, so of the 70 zoological collections in 22 institutions, one of the criteria that came out, or all the criteria together, that all of the McGregor Museum's collections scored at a higher risk than the rest of them. And in particularly, the herpetological collection. The reason being was that both the mammal collection and the ornithological collection were 100% accessioned and 100% databased. But the herpetological collection was awaiting databasing, and it had to be rebottled, the majority of it. Those kind of procedures had already taken place in the other collections during my stay as the collection manager. But as I was starting on the herpetology collection, I was promoted to the post of zoologist, and that then actually came out of my portfolio. So this was one of the problems. The reason that the collections were listed as being such a high risk was because I was the only person in the entire department, and I was holding the position of zoologist as well as the collection manager. So the loss of myself in 5 collections, which in any other institution would have their own biologist as well as their own collections manager or curator, would have been a severe problem for the collections, and obviously their biggest risk. Next, please, Ian. So, right, we call it the Power Collection, and this is the reason why. It's named after, actually John, sorry, not Johann, John Hyacinth Power, who was born in Ireland in 1884, and he died unexpectedly in December 1964 from a stroke. But he was the second director of the McGregor Museum after Maria Willman, who was one of the first female directors ever of a museum in South Africa, and incidentally in the world. He was the honorary curator of herpetology from 1917. He'd actually come out to South Africa, and he was a brother at the local Christian Brothers College where he was a teacher. And he later left the brotherhood and actually got married and had some children. But whilst he was still teaching, he was the honorary curator of herpetology because of an interest in herpetology. And this was encouraged actively by Dr. Louis Perronguet, who was the director of the South African Museum and also a well-known herpetologist of himself. The first of over 40 publications appeared in 1913 in the Annuals of the South African Museum. Obviously under the guidance of Dr. Perronguet. And he collected and described many types of specimens in southern and central Africa. And some of the species that he worked on have been named after him in his honor. That includes Bufo, the Breviceps, and the Hyperolus were named after him. Under his guidance, the museum became a provincially aided museum. Previous to that, it was a self-funding. And obviously, after it became a provincially aided museum, things could actually happen a lot more efficiently. Staff were then incorporated as public servants and were paid accordingly. And this was a huge boost and allowed a lot more hiring to occur. In hindsight, I sometimes wonder if this has perhaps not been the worst thing that ever happened, because currently we are now under the guidance of the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture, under whom we have almost certainly the natural sciences have absolutely no recognition whatsoever, because we are not considered as a priority, because the focus obviously is on transformation in a democratic South Africa, and our focus has become the human sciences within our museum of late. Besides that, he had to the museum as a whole is deserving of honoring the herpetology collection and calling it the Power Collection. Next, please, Ian. All right. So pre the intervention of the National Science Collections Facility, the collection was only partially accessioned, and there was a backlog of about 2,500 specimens collected by myself and a colleague from the United States in 2010 and 2011. And there were also a number of unaccessioned historical items, mostly those that had not been identified yet. So I had carried out some partial rebottling, mostly of the amphibian collection, and there was a partial catalogue card system in place only of what I had rebottled to this point. But everything was housed in a variety of jars, in a variety of formats. Contents could be mixed. There could be 100 specimens from 30 localities and 15 different accession numbers in a single bottle. The contents of the bottles were preserved in anything from ethanol to formalin to methylated spirits to brandy, and in one or two cases, even petrol. So it was a nightmare, and it needed very, very careful rebottling. It was a slow process, and it obviously needed serious attention. And given the fact that I cannot dedicate all of my time, because it's a continuous basis, what you do today must be followed up tomorrow, must be followed up by the next day. The collection was just held in hiatus and nothing was happening. Next, please, Ian. So from 2019 to 2020, thanks to the National Collections Facility, we were able to put two people on board, and who you're going to be meeting later. So we basically, our entire department consisted of myself and Heidi Fischier, the collections manager, who I might well be losing at the end of the year if we lose our fight to keep a position. And then Christian came along, and when it became obvious to everyone that his workload was beyond anything that we had expected, had originally realized that the 30 or the 27 odd thousand specimens that we thought were in it was probably going to be a great deal more. We then had to make a plan, and possibly the most Christian turned out to be a very popular staff member, but he was equally popular when Adrian joined him. And we're not just talking about Conti, who's the biggest attraction to the department. The two guys sitting in the herb collection, playing with snakes and funny things, resulted in a huge flow of staff and visitors watching what they were doing. So they were great to have in the collection, despite the work that they were doing. Next, please, Ian. Right, so this is them at work. And you can see why it looked like a lot of fun. A lot of the specimens that they encountered were in these huge buckets. That was courtesy of my massive collecting. I did a 37,000 kilometer road trip that took 7 weeks, and that I've collected, 2,500 specimens in that time. So they had their work cut out, sorting out through my stuff, as well as the backlog of other stuff. But yeah, it was fun to have them on board. Next, please, Ian. And the final results look something like this, and they're going to tell you a bit more about this. But this is what the end result looked like. Everything is into console jars. It's in correct 70% ethanol. The retagging process is still underway, as well as the full accessioning. But it is accessioned now. Sorry, Ian, could you go to the next one? Because I think that's going to capture and summarize the final thing. All right, that's looking at it from a distance. As you can see, it's a hell of a lot better. It's just truly amazing. You cannot believe the transformation that the two guys have been able to achieve. Next, Ian. Right, so this is the final thing. The collection is now entirely rebottled. We used 500 liters of 96 ethanol. So obviously we diluted that out to 70%. So you can imagine how many liters of ethanol we used. Everything is now fully identified and classified. Everything is fully accessioned and catalogued. The collection is fully captured on Specify. So it now joins the other collections that are fully captured. They're partially relabeled. That turned out to be a really, really slow process because of the multitude of specimens. So that is ongoing by the collections manager, and Heidi should finish that job by the end of the year. And so the specifics about the process and what they did and how they did it will be carried out, will be discussed now by Christian and Adrian. So thank you, guys.
Ian, can you?
My side.
So morning, everyone. I'm Adrian, and as Christina introduced both me and Christian, NSCF herpetology curation technicians, and yeah, we spent some time sorting out backlog material at McGregor Museum. Next slide, please. So the initial scope of our work when we arrived at McGregor was, as Beryl set the scene, is that we are basically responsible and tasked with updating and verifying any specimen identifications and assessing the collection basically. And when necessary, we needed to take do taxonomic updates and things like that. So we did basically 2 levels of identifications, and those were dependent on the quality of the specimens, on their condition. So where possible, we always tried to go for species level identifications, but often it wasn't really possible, especially when you work with amphibians. They tend to bleach out rather quickly. And a lot of the specimens were bleached out, and the diagnostic features and things like that weren't really visible. So for those things where we were uncertain, we went with genus level identifications, and there was a couple of thousands of amphibians that were actually that we could only take to genus level. I think about 1,000 actually. The other task we were busy with was we developed a spreadsheet with a taxonomic backbone that we could upload on the Specify database. Ian, can you go to the next slide? However, there were some unexpected challenges, obviously, during the work. And yeah, working through some of these historic collections, you end up getting a jar with we had some specimens with 40 specimens tied together in a single clump, and you get duplicate catalog numbers and things like that. And when we looked further into the specified database, we realized that it didn't fully represent the entirety of the collection, and that the collection on specifier was actually just based on accessions. So we actually went and split all the clumps of specimens to individual specimens and assigned new catalog numbers while retaining the original verbatim information with these animals, and then preparing a workbench template to redo the whole herpetological collection specified database. So as Beryl mentioned, where we rebottled the entire herb collection, that was a pretty big task because we had to go through a lot of ethanol, and it's not just simply rebottling, because a lot of the preservation fluid and things like that are pretty much degraded and of very low concentrations of alcohol. So we first needed to put the specimens through a rinsing process and then gradually rebottle them into new console bottles. Then, of course, it's something that's not new to any one of us, but COVID was also kind of in the mix, because certain times there were positive or scares or positive cases at the museum, and which means we couldn't work in the collection anymore. But however, as we all have been seeing in this pandemic, and getting back to yesterday's talk about resilience, is that we could actually just work from home so we can get back to the collection and do data related stuff. Next slide, please, Ian. So in terms of dealing with these challenges, we conducted basically a full audit of all the specimens in the entire collection, and we also identified all the regularities and things like that that pertain to the specified database. And this eventually led to a lot of uncatalogued specimens, and which we then incorporated into the main collection. Yeah, another big challenge was rebottling, as I said. And yeah, we transitioned all the specimens to console jars. Yeah, Beryl already did most of the amphibians, so we mostly looked at the reptiles in rebottling. Next slide. Christian will take over from here.
Morning, everyone. Yes, as Adrian mentioned, initially getting to the process of, sort of identifying this issue of, how would we, deal with all of the at-risk specimens, seeing as it was an orphan collection and, Beryl as a single person could only do so much. It was almost imperative, that we needed to intervene in terms of the preservation fluid and things like that. The other issue that we had was tracking things, and everybody knows that things get lost in collections if you don't post them back where you take them from. And for that, we decided to not only to track our own progress, working in the collection and working with all of these different jars, to try and label the bottles. Since we were moving away from the historic jars in the collection that were in some cases leaking and damaged, we needed to sort of keep track of these bottles, because many of these bottles still contained external labeling that might have been useful along the, later on in the process, for us to source information, that we could link to the specimens. So each of the bottles that we interacted with, a number was written on the bottle. Label was then assigned to that batch from that bottle, and this number traveled with the specimens through the rinsing process. We wrote by hand the bottle numbers to keep track of them, and this was also later on to create the storage tree, which I'll mention a bit later in Specify. So a few lessons learned from this process was that writing the jar numbers by hand was not very time consuming, but it was very arduous. It wasn't the easiest thing to do. I think we wrote over 1,000 bottle labels and things like that. Having a label printer would have been much easier. And we have subsequently, been in positions where we've had access to label printers. And for anybody that is considering, interacting or doing taking on a rebottling exercise within their collections, will feel the need to upgrade a little. Getting one of these label printers is not that expensive, and really makes things easier. They're very neat. And as we've seen at KwaZulu-Natal, at Pietermaritzburg, they are quite resilient against the alcohol and things like that and being handled. The other thing that we learned, when we sort of thought of how would we deal with this rebottling of about 5,000 plus specimens was, in the quickest possible way, we decided on using bags. It took us about 3 days or so to realize that our initial solutions were not the best. We had a little sort of a specimen tray that we constructed that you could push into a bucket, and very soon we realized that this was not going to suffice. It was not going to work. So we went over to creating small bags out of shade cloth, a soft shade cloth net, in which we would place a label, and these would then be rinsed in these large buckets, so that we would always know which specimens came from which of the historic bottles. Now, subsequently, and you'll hear in our presentation on the PE Museum, we have learned a better technique of approaching this problem. So you have to join us for that one to learn more about this process. So using the bags worked well. But there is a better way if you have containers that you're going to retain to deal with this problem, and that would be to rinse inside of the bottles as well. Next slide. So as we talked about this innovative solution, it was, I think, one of the innovations that we had was dealing with the specimens in the bags, as I discussed. You can see Adrian removing some specimens from a small container and placing them into one of these bags. This was the specimens, after being placed into the bags, were then rinsed down to get scales and things off, and also to sort of like remove preservation fluid that wasn't, up to standard. In many cases, we had things like diesel, formalin, and things that we needed to deal with as well. Next slide. So another one of the solutions that we had is, with the collections these days and with taxonomy, if you are in a field where the taxonomy changes rapidly, you always struggle to keep up. Unless you're an avid reader and you have time for all of the updates, sometimes it's nice to have some assistance. And seeing as we are, have a lot of different technologies to our disposal, we decided to create the shelf labels for each of the groups, but also include a QR code link to stable taxonomies, at least ones that we accept. Now, both reptile database and amphibian species of the world are not perfect, but they're the best options that we have. You guys are free, if you've got cell phones, while the slide is up, you're welcome to scan that any of these QR codes with your camera, and you'll see it will direct you to an updated list of the South African reptiles, as well as the amphibians, or with the agamas as well, a list of South African agamas, or African agamas. So these are on the shelves now. So if you are moving through the collection, you have the option to explore the current state as updated by Reptile Database and Amphibian Species of the World of taxonomy within these groups, for example. Next slide. So the last thing that we did for McGregor and is to create a full-fledged storage tree. Now, for you guys that are starting to use Specify or have gotten into Specify, I cannot stress the value of this feature in terms of understanding where your specimens are or your material is. And also when doing queries for individuals that have specific requests. So as you can see here on the screen, the setup what we have here is the wet room, room C16. And this is just a very basic example. Each of the shelves belong to a storage unit, and the jars are standing on a shelf. And inside of the jars, we have got different specimens that are linked to the catalog numbers. So if you, for example, do a query, if somebody asks you for a bunch of Agama specimens, let's say Agama atra, what you then do is in your Specify, you would then add your query, search for Agama atra with the option of seeing in which storage units these specimens are, which means then for you to walk into the collection and know exactly where to go is, after this is set up, unbelievably helpful in terms of saving time, because everybody knows how long it sometimes takes to find certain specimens or a missing specimen. So, all of these innovations and things like that are about reducing friction points within the process. And as we are moving towards more modern collections, I believe storage trees and these things are very valuable to us because it saves us time. And that's something that's very important. Time, is valuable, especially going forward with capacity issues and things like that. It's important that you use every second, and anything that helps with that, I believe, is something that you need to embrace and move towards. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all of you. I'm going to allow a couple of questions now while Beryl is with us. I don't know what your time frame is. Does anyone have any questions? You can pop it in the chat box if you do. I have one in the meantime that I wanted to ask you guys is how much did you liaise with the NSCF hub team during this time? Are you guys just experts on Specify, or did you ask Ian questions all the time, or was there a lot of linkage between the the hub team and yourselves?
If I can answer that, yeah, no, we were received training at the beginning of on Specify as we started with this process, we do come from technical backgrounds, software and still young and all of these things. So it was very quick to learn the process. I've had experience with Access databases prior to this, through this process, Ian was very supportive and assisted us a lot with a lot of our questions and queries. If that answers your question.
Yeah, see, Ian does say that he's your boss. So, and did you guys have a zoological background? So first time I'm meeting you.
Yes, yeah, both of us have zoological backgrounds. Specifically expertise in haptology. Okay, so a background in IT and your chosen biological field is clearly very useful, and perhaps something that our younger people should remember. It's always good to have a foot in both doors. Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah. Oh, someone wants you to come to the Albany Museum. Are you still at the PE Museum? I'm looking at the chat group.
I'm still on this side, but I have to unfortunately go to the Durban Museum next.
Oh dear, Helen wants you. So if you can, maybe Helen at the Albany Museum would love to see you guys. So maybe what you can do is do a visit quickly before you leave and try and link with the Albany people at least. Maybe make future plans or give them some ideas. Maybe that will help.
I see if I've offended Loki as well. I apologize. I will make good when I see you again.
Cool. Well, thank you guys. I found that very interesting. Are there any more questions from anyone? No. Okay, then I'm going to ask you guys to move on to your next presentation. Our time is getting a bit short, so perhaps if we can move through this one a bit more more speedily. Over to you, Ian and Christian and Adrian. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, so hello again. So another institution Christian and I visited was, and was most recently, was Port Elizabeth Museum. And I'll start off by just giving you a bit of overview about the collection. Ian, can you go to the next slide? So the Port Elizabeth Museum Herpetology Department was started by Fitzsimons during the early 1900s, and it also happened to be the first snake park in Africa, which was also started by Fitzsimons. It had a number of curators throughout the years, but there was specifically when Paul Branch started as curator in 1979 at the collection. He made a really significant impact on the collection, and it really grew when he was at the helm. The collection had a very big increase during the early 1990s, and it received quite a few specimens from 3 particular institutions. The Matola Museum, which it received about 600 specimens from. The Albany Museum donation was about almost 7,000 specimens, and then Cape Nature gave, I think, about 2,700 specimens. And from there on, the collection just grew from strength to strength. And as it's currently known, it's the Paul Branch Herpetological Collection in memory of Paul, who passed away about 2 years ago. Next slide. So the PE Herpetology collection is the 3rd largest in Africa, and it's growing really fast. It's growing with about 4 to 5% annually, and looking at the size of the collection is about 2,000 specimens. That's contributed each year to the collection. So it's growing really fast. It's also the 2nd largest collection of primary type specimens in Africa, and it's the 2nd largest collection in South Africa, coming in next to the Tsang's Herpetology collection. It's probably also one of the most diverse collections in South Africa, and it boasts specimens from about 30 countries from across the continent. Next slide. So the scope of work we were sent to do at Baywold had to do with backlog specimens, and so we had to look at quality control and assurance of specimens, look at spreadsheets and for the things that we upload to specify. We also had to wash and rebottle specimens, but from McGregor we learned from our, not mistakes, but from things that we could have done better. And at PE we approach it totally different, which we feel is a more effective way of dealing with it. And I think Christian will talk a little bit more about that a bit later. We also had to look at taxonomic updates for each specimens, and because I don't know if anybody's familiar with herpetological taxonomy, but it moves extremely fast. So you could be at one institution, next institution you go to, you need to update a whole bunch of species names and things like that. We also verified all the taxonomic backbones for the reptiles and both amphibians, and we did specimen labeling, and we consolidated everything back into the collection of all the backlog material after they've been labeled and uploaded to Specify. Next slide, please. Yeah, like I said, like we dealt with the historic backlog, and like all museums, I'm sure most of you can vouch for that. But no collection is is clear of backlog material. At least that's how we find it in the herpetology departments that and collections we work in. That there's always some backlogs, some more, some collections have way more backlogs than others, but there's always some backlogs. And the backlog at the herpetology collection at Beowulf consisted of mainly 3 collections. It was the Albany Museum collection, and it was historic backlog specimens originating from Beowulf itself, the Port Elizabeth Museum, and then also from East London Museum. But the bulk of the backlog originated from the Albany Museum, and it had to do with the fire. So a lot of specimens were burned and damaged and things like that, but a lot of data could be salvaged, and a lot of specimens could be incorporated into the collection and then uploaded into the database and to Specify. Next slide, please. So we also had some challenges at this museum. And one of the big challenges is limited time. There's so many things, and if you don't accordingly plan well, before you actually start the work, you might be actually wasting time. So we divided our time into adequate planning and assessing what needs to be done, and then working from there and assigning tasks and switching between tasks, because some of the tasks can really become monotonous at times. So it's important, we feel it's important to switch tasks. So either work on data for a couple of hours, then work with physical specimens, and then do the rinsing. So you've got kind of a routine and you stay motivated and things like that. We also had the issue of COVID, just as we had at the McGregor Museum, where there was positive cases and we had to adapt due to the circumstances. But luckily, we learned from McGregor and how to approach it and how to work online and do database stuff, so that we don't lose any time. So that we can just, when we get back to the museum, hit the ground running. We also inherited a spreadsheet that catalogued a lot of the specimens in the backlog museum, but the spreadsheet wasn't set up in a way that the columns had standard terms that matches the workbench templates and stuff like that we use to upload the Specify, upload to Specify. So we had to do a lot of reviewing and making sure that every column matches the names of the Specify template that we created. We also realized that there was a varying degree of specimen quality, and it has to do with the physical quality of the specimens and also the data quality of the specimens. So during our initial assessment, we decided to categorize specimens based on physical quality of the specimens and the data quality. So you could basically carry out kind of like a triage approach where you prioritize high quality specimens first and then move hierarchical down the way to specimens with low data quality and things like that. And then we did a lot of data quality control also on the spreadsheets and things like that before we uploaded it to the workbench and Specify. Next slide, please. I think Christian will take over from the solutions right now.
Hello again. Yes. You know, with any each of the institutions, there's always you know, some compromise that needs to be made, and every institution is different from each other. with the labeling that we had to do at the Port Elizabeth Museum, or Ubega, if you apologize my pronunciation, we immediately realized that we would not have enough time to deal with both the data-related issues of making sure that the records were of high quality, and at the same time also dealing with the labeling of these specimens. That's when we contacted Ian from the NSCF and also and asked him if it was possible for us to get research assistants to assist us with the labeling. They were very happy to provide the assistance, and this allowed us to produce data which could then be uploaded to Specify, and which the two research assistants, Sibu and Courtney, could label for us. The you know, in some cases where we had to isolate at home, for example, as well, which was one of the other solutions, was the fact that we were always positioned to work and clean data. You know, so we never wasted any time. We were well equipped to work from home and deal with these issues. And the other thing with the standardized spreadsheet format streamlined the process of uploading to Specify. So initially, I think Adrian mentioned it briefly, but initially we had a lot of friction between the spreadsheet that we had at the disposal and the workbench template that we used to go to Specify. And over time, I think it was 2 or 3 batches that we uploaded, we sort of worked out all of these problems and made sure that the spreadsheet that we were working on communicated very well with the spreadsheet, at least the workbench template that we were using to upload the records to Specify. Next slide, please. One of the solutions that we had, and Adrian mentioned this a little bit earlier, was dealing with, at least we were in the advantage, or had the advantage, that one of our colleagues, Alex, that worked for the NSCF a while back, digitized and transcribed all of the labels and of the specimens that we were going to accession. So we had the spreadsheet, and inside of the spreadsheet, we identified a few columns. Since Port Elizabeth Museum requested us to make sure that we target priority specimens first, because that would be the quickest approach. You know, I'm currently dealing with some of the problem specimens, and that takes a much longer time. We identified these 4 categories, basically, or at least columns, that would assist us with categorizing each of the issues within the collection. There's just 3 examples here on the screen that you can see, and these were just very basic. So we looked at the species condition that was assigned by Alex, the identification confidence that he assigned to his identification, whether or not the taxon had an identification. And just to expand a little bit on that, we used formulas in Excel to determine the amount of spaces in a taxon name. And if there was only 1 space or no spaces, that would generally be either a blank cell with no identification, or a generic or family level identification. Looking for 2 spaces gave us the opportunity to know at least there was a species in the box. And then the locality name must not have been empty. Now, some of the, you know, some things that slip through, you know, there's always a manual part to automating a task like this. But in general, this worked very well, and it allowed us to target specific bottles that, based on our criteria, were of high quality, or that required verification of identifications or improved ID confidences. Next slide. In terms of our rinsing, we were limited to Mondays and Tuesdays because we did not want to leave specimens in low concentrations of ethanol over the weekends. This meant, you know, not sort of just rushing through everything and just like, let's rebottle. by keeping it to Mondays and Tuesdays, we allowed ourselves enough time to process at least 300 or so specimens from a Monday, sometimes 400 combined with the Tuesday. And this was manageable for us to produce specimens at a decent rate, while also being able to get to our data-related work. Next slide. So again, because of the amount of time we spent, dealing with these with the data, and prior to loading records on Specify, we cleaned and sourced a lot of locality information. Now, at the same time, just like at McGregor Museum, there were a few specimen clumps that we split to make sure that each of the specimens received a unique catalog number. Now, we do this for specimens that are attached to each other, not necessarily specimens, I believe specimens, sorry, that are not attached to each other. In the case where you had a specimen, for example, a juvenile attached to an adult, for the purposes of our exercise, we kept those as a single catalog number so as not to delay our progress with the bulk of the work. Also, things like metamorphs in the amphibians, they were accessioned as lots under one accession number. And similar with tadpoles and things like that. So for everybody that's using Specify, if we can provide you some good advice, it's very important to make sure that your data is of a good quality before you upload it to Specify. Not because it's difficult to clean it later on, it's just you've got so much more room to play with when you are working on a spreadsheet, for example, and doing bulk cleaning and dealing with standardizing localities and names and things like that. So, it's good practice to make sure that you work with small batches, maybe of 60 or so, that's what we did. And after cleaning that 60 records, uploading it to Specify with limited issues later on. Next slide. So this brings us back to our previous presentation, but also, sort of ties into what we learned here. Replacing the old preservation fluid in the original specimen jars, but much easier, as you remember the photo that we showed you previously. But this was also possible because we retained the original jars in most cases. So, when you are switching jars, a different approach might work well, but if you're rinsing with, specimens that are going to stay or live in the same jar, working with the jars does increase the speed of things. And then also when working with large backlogs, or trying to sort of like tackle something like this, take your time, plan your approach as we did, and then things run smoothly later on. Next slide. Then again, similar to at McGregor, assigning bottle numbers allows us to keep track of everything. And when we pick up a bottle, we know what's inside of it. And when we process specimens, we know what to take out of it, so that we're always aware of where these specimens are. And, here at Port Elizabeth, there was a lot going on. But if you ask us for a bottle, we just go onto the spreadsheet, we type in the number, and you can be sure we'll get it to you within 30 seconds. We know exactly where it is in the collection. We've mentioned about the rinsing process and what we did here at PE, to just be quick, and I think we're almost done, was to use a very fine material, almost not like a shade cloth, but like a gauze or sort of like a material that we would place over the tubs that contained our rinsing liquids. And that would prevent us from dropping, or unfortunately dropping, accidentally dropping tails into the alcohol or losing labels, and also keeping this rinsing liquid clean so that we could maximize the use, which is quite important, especially if you think about, budgets that might be affected by COVID and things like that. You want to get the most out of your alcohol and save as much as you can. And that's, that's about it. I think in terms of the categorization, I believe that was also quite innovative.
Thank you very much, Christian and Adrian. Oh, sorry, you still want to quickly tell us about your future work?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, the future work just for PE, I believe PE is currently in the process of moving over their propanol preservation fluids to ethanol. They want to rearrange the collection phylogenetically, also label the jars based on our advice and what we did at McGregor Museum, implement the storage tree, and then customize their specified forms. So this is just a taste of when institutions share information between each other, we can find solutions to problems we have without trying to solve them again.
Thank you very much. I found that very interesting, and I think the lessons you guys have learned will be very useful to other people as well. If there's one or two urgent questions, if anyone would like to put up their hand or chat, put in the chat box. Otherwise, I think we're going to move on to plants now and look at the experience that we've had at the Bewes Herbarium. So I never introduced myself. I'm the Christina Potgieter-Curry, the principal technician at the Bewes Herbarium at UKZN in Pietermaritzburg. And we've been involved for the past few years through the very generous assistance from the NSCF as well, with incorporating a few orphan collections. The Killick collection, which was the old KZN Wildlife collection in Pietermaritzburg, and now more recently the Ward collection, which is the old University of Durban-Westville collection. So Sofiso and Tanya, who are our curation technicians through NSCF, are going to take you through the presentation. Over to you guys.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Christina. As Christina have mentioned, our task with Tanya is to integrate the Killick Herbarium as well as Ward Herbarium collections to Bewes collection. So initially we started with Killick collection. What actually was needed from me before the start of the project was to have a workflow to show the steps that will be taken to make sure that the integration of the collection works smoothly. So what I did is to come up with 9 steps to make sure that the integration of the collection is done properly. So my thought was to make sure that initially I prepared the storage or the temporary storage of specimen at Bewes, that we have the storage to store a small amount of collection that we're going to be transporting from the Killick Herbarium, and then organizing the packaging material as well as the booking of vehicles, because we had to make sure that on the day where we're supposed to go and collect some of the specimen, we know that we have the transport, we have the packages that we're going to use to properly pack the specimen from the Killick Herbarium to Bewes. As well as on arrival at Bewes, I'll have to make sure that we also have the vacant freezer that we're going to use to decontaminate the specimen, and having to know that that freezer should only be dedicated to that integration of specimen. And then another step was to make sure that we take the images of all the specimens that arrive at Bewes, to make sure that we have the record of what came in from the Killick Herbarium. And then after that, then another step was to make sure that we check all or verify the identification of all the specimen before the specimen is actually accessioned or filed in the collection. So can you move to the second slide, please? Okay, so Our presentation, the first presentation will be learning, having the introduction, the project aims, the methods or steps, challenges that we had, the solutions towards the challenges, and then the progress so far. Next slide, please. Buse Herbarium and Killick Herbarium combined their collection to build a strength in political research, which started in March 2019 and ended in September 2010. So the first part of the integration, saying that we have been integrating the Killick and Ward. So the first part, which is Killick Herbarium, started in March 2019 and well, I can say partially ended in September 2020. Okay, about 33,000 specimens were estimated to be integrated to the collection based from the knowledge we've obtained from the Killick Herbarium from SMVelo. And the integration will allow a free access to all digitized collection by many researchers. So the more collection or the more data we have at Buse Herbarium will allow more researchers to access collection. All specimens were decontaminated, barcoded, and imaged and partially digitized before integrated. As I've mentioned earlier before that, before we've started the project, we had to come up with the workflow. So the workflow had to make sure that the decontamination is there and the barcoding to make sure that we are able to have data of the specimen as well as imaging the specimen and partially digitizing certain information were done before the integration of the specimen. So the integration is definitely a win for both institutions. How? SMVelo Wildlife, where Killick Herbarium was based, gains access to a larger data sets for their conservation assessment researchers, and then Buse Herbarium increases its collections to be used for botanical research, especially that Buse is in the university, so even students will have a larger amount of botanical collection to work on. Next slide, please. So on our first trip to Killick Herbarium, when we came back, we first the Killick Herbarium staff handled to our curator the first specimen, which is from the fan collection. Next slide, please. The three main aims of the project was to provide well-maintained plant specimen and secure the future of the Killick Herbarium collection. Also to provide an easy access of plant specimen and more data to researchers, as I've initially on my previous slide said, and to identify the priority tags for curation in case we come across with the tags that are not curated or that are not that do not have the currently names that are used, and we normally alert our principal technician, which is Dr. Christina, and that we have found certain tags that might need collection, and then should decide whether those plants should be curated at the time or for later stages. Next slide, please. So our first step method, once the specimen arrived at Buse Herbarium and have been stored, our first step to start our integration is to decontaminate the specimen. How? By freezing them for 72 hours. Next slide, please. And then our second step was to make sure that we image all the decontaminated specimen, because now that our freezer is outside the main door to the herbarium. So before we take the specimen inside the herbarium, we need to decontaminate them. Once we have decontaminated them, that's where we start imaging those specimens and saving the images on the NRTE file through barcodes. Next slide, please. And then once the specimen has been imaged, then the verification of plant identification happens, and the curation, as well as writing down the GenSpec numbers on the specimens to make sure that it is easy for the filing of those specimens when needed to be filed in the exact plant collection. Next slide, please. So another step after the verification of specimen, what follows is that we separate the specimen into batches based on their state of flaking, such that during the identification process, we also identify whether the specimen is ready for filing, or whether the specimen needs repairs or renovations, or if any specimen is complicated, then we have to put that specimen aside and decide what to do with it later. And then whether the specimen needs to be discarded. Some of the specimen that were flagged to be discarded are specimens that are completely damaged, that cannot be repaired, and in some cases specimen that has no label and no collector numbers, as well as specimen that has sometimes you only have the label with no specimen in the mounting board. Can you next slide, please? So what we've realized that since initially I've mentioned on my workflow the steps that we needed to take during this integration, we've realized that some of the plant were not in the good state and some were badly eaten. So we realized that maybe the second freezing to decontaminate for the second time for another 72 hours after all these processes before we file the specimen in the main collection is needed. So we decided to do that. Next slide, please. So after the second freezing, then we file the specimen or ascertain them in the collection. And it should be stressed that when the specimens are filed, they are filed on their own, specimen from Helicobacterium are filed on their own specific Helicobacterium species cover with the stamped. Next slide, please. So the challenges that we've encountered in some of the specimens that we come across was that having two different species in one mounting board, but with one label. And some specimens were mounted on an A4 size photocopy paper, and two specimens with same barcode. That's some of the challenges that we've encountered, which actually slowed down the process. Some specimens were completely destroyed, so we had to make a call. One specimen with two different labels. So we've also come across with this where you had to be able to identify which exactly the suitable label for this specimen based on the description of the plant as well as the plant name. And on also having good specimens without field labels and no collector number to be able at least to contact the collector regarding their specimen, and some incorrectly identified specimen being filed under wrong collection, as well as COVID-19 lockdown, which delayed the integration. Next slide, please. So here is just a picture of some of the specimens that we have encountered, that we had to take decisions on how to deal with them. You can see that the first two specimens are badly eaten. And the third specimen, a specimen that needs the repairs because it is, firstly, it is mounted on the brown paper, and actually it's not mounted, it was just placed on the brown paper. So we need to remount that on an acid-free mounting board. Next slide, please. So some of the solutions was, as I said, mounting each specimen on separate mounting board for those specimens that has for those specimens that were found to be mounted on one mounting board, and then pasting those A4 mounted specimen on proper herbarium mounting board, and allocating a different barcode to second specimen. Remember I said we have specimen that has two different specimens with one similar barcode, and then also have to take a broader decision on whether to deaccession the specimen, meaning that flag those specimen as a useless specimen. But I should also stress that the deaccessioning of the specimen, we did not immediately discard those specimens or throw them away. No, they are still kept in the storage on the cabinet to make sure that should maybe anyone from Kilike Herbarium or anyone from the researchers really want to see the physical specimen that we have flagged as a discarded specimen, we still have the proof of that image or of that physical specimen. And also assigning correct labels to suitable specimen, there you need to at least be a plant specialist to be able to identify the plant and know exactly where the label belongs to. And then also the identification of incorrectly identified specimens also had to play a role, because if not, then the specimen will be wrongly filed in the collection, and whoever wants to work with that specimen won't be able to find it. And also flagging of specimens recorded in RDE file. So all these specimens, remember I said all these specimens were firstly imaged as they are before they were separated into batches and then flagged for deaccessioning. So on the RDE file on BRAM's database, we will go and flag this specimen through barcodes, and on the flagging field we'll have the flag whether the specimen is being filed in the herbarium, or whether the specimen is waiting for repairs, or whether the specimen went for renovation, or whether the specimen is being discarded. So we have that on our RDE files. We flag those specimens to make sure that we actually know where are these specimens in the collection. Next slide, please. So there's some, okay, on our first image, it's where my colleague Tanya is renovating the specimen that is filed on the A4 size paper. And then on our right, it's where we store the specimen waiting for repairs. So what we did is we make sure that those that need the repairs, because they need a lot of time, we just put them on in storage and be like, we will be working with them once we finish all the integrations, especially when we are still funded, of course. Next slide, please. So the progress so far for the integration of Killikeberium, remember initially we had weights that the estimation of the Killikeberium specimen that we are going to move were about 33,000. So in total, there are about 27,455 Killik specimens that were integrated, that I can safely say they are filed in Bu's herbarium that anyone can find in the cabinet. And then on those, we found about 50 type specimens that were in that collection from Killikeberium specimens. So the project worked because these type specimens are very useful in terms of taxonomic research to be able to work with those type specimens. And it went easy to access them when they were at Killik and they were at risk of being completely destroyed. And then 323 specimens were flagged to be deaccessioned. So out of all the specimens, from all the specimens that we have integrated at BUs, only 323 from that 33,000 estimates, we've decided that they are not good enough. Have their images on that BRAMS RDE files, and we also have the physical specimen stored separately on the cabinet flagged for deaccessioning. And then about 3,850 specimens were flagged for renovation. So those specimens are some of those specimens were the specimens that needed to, that were filed on the A4 photocopy papers. And then 2,000 specimens have been renovated for that 3,850 specimens. So we have roughly about 1,800 specimens that still needs to be renovated, that were mounted on the A4 size paper. And then about 1,000 specimens are waiting for repairs, which for remounting. So those specimens that completely needed to be remounted are those specimens that we have put on the cabinets that has that NSCF repaired cabinet. And then with that 27,445 specimens, now we estimated that BU's collection is over 180,000 specimens. Next slide, please. Okay, I'll just let my colleague Tanya take over the integration of World Herbarium.
Guys, can I just interject quickly? So it's 11 o'clock now, and we're all supposed to be back at 11:15 for the next session. And I'm just worried about the time that we've taken already, and that people do want to get tea, and I really don't want us to run past the 15:15. So yeah, so I'm not really sure. Christina, what do you feel we should do?
I think actually, since everyone is still here, if we can just let Tanya finish, because I think it would be too interrupted. If people need to get up and get their cup of tea and then come back, I think it's fine. I think stopping it now would be really sad. So if you're able to stay with us, please do. I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, Tanya.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Tanya, as Sifiso has said. So my part will be more of a photo-based story time of our journey to collecting specimens from World Herbarium and integrating them into BU's herbarium. So, but firstly, I will just give you a bit of a history of World Herbarium. World Herbarium is named after the late Roddy Ward, a prominent ecologist who started the collection and taught botany at the University of Durban, Westville. When the universities of of Natal and Durban Westville merged over a decade ago. The Howard College collection with 7,500 specimens merged with the White collection with 15,000 specimens to be housed in a new biology building on the Westville campus of UKZN. Operational and space concerns dictated the move of the White collection to Buse Herbarium in Pietermaritzburg, but the White collection will still maintain a small presence on Westville campus to allow research loans exchange. A small subset of the samples will move back to Westville campus once the new space has been completed as a quick guide for KZN plans to assist researchers in Westville. Next slide, please. Upon arrival at White Herbarium, we were met by the White Herbarium staff and the head of school. It was a bittersweet moment because they had to let go of their collection but they were also happy that their collection was going to a good home. Next slide, please. So when we started the process, we were about a team of 5 Buse Herbarium staff, and with the help of Edward Kati, who was from White Herbarium, assisting us. This process took a week. It was during the spring spring break in September 2019. Next slide, please. So here is just some of the photos showing us during the process. We were very excited and we had a lot of teamwork. So the process actually went by fast. Next slide, please. So here is the curator of Buse Herbarium, Dr. Beta Bia and Sifiso here, very excited to see the specimens packed and ready to go. Next slide, please. This was the most exciting part for us to see all the over 250 boxes of specimens, which we had stored in a designated room. And this is thanks to the hard work of our team and also the White Herbarium staff who were of great assistance to us. Next slide, please. Incorporating of the White Herbarium specimen. On arrival at Buse Herbarium, the specimens were kept in a room with controlled temperature until the incorporation begins. Due to the difference between the states of the White Herbarium and Killick Herbarium, the states of the specimens, the steps used to incorporate the specimens were slightly different. The incorporation of the White Herbarium specimen started in October of 2020 till date. 2 collections. There are 2 collections from White Herbarium. It is the main White Herbarium collection from former University of Durban Westville, and then the smaller collection, which is from the former Howard collection from the University of Natal. Next slide, please. So here is our workflow, which is similar to what Sifiso has already said, but this one is just slightly different, as I said before. So we do decontaminate the specimens for 72 hours, and then Sifiso does the scientific curation. I do the barcoding of the specimens. Well, the specimens from Killick Herbarium already had barcodes, but these ones don't have barcodes, so I have to barcode them. Then I move on to imaging the specimens. Then I create genus folders or just and sort the specimens, and then we file them and put them into their new home. Next slide, please. With the challenges, there were no major challenges encountered with this collection. The challenges that we experienced when incorporating the Kili collection helped us to minimize the delays and to speed up the integration. Next slide, please. The progress so far is the incorporation of the UNDA, the UNDH has been completed with the exception of specimens that are waiting for labels. Over 4,500 specimens were incorporated for UNDH, and currently in the process of incorporating UDW, which is the main collection. We are still at the beginning stages with about 1,000 specimens incorporated so far. Next slide, please. We would like to thank the NSCF for funding the projects and our salaries for the past 2 years and funding the new cupboards to accommodate these collections. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Sifiso and Tanya. And also thank you very much to all our presenters in this session. I know we went over time, but I think it shows how everyone has so much to say because they've learned a lot during this process. They've built on their experience. And what I'm going to do, since we probably don't have time for questions, but please do pop your questions in the chat box. We can still answer them. As I'm going to make a summary of some of the lessons learned, some of the steps that one takes for these sort of projects, and I will ask the Hub team to circulate that. And also I will put in, if the presenters don't mind, everyone's contact details. So if you do have any questions about specifics for both orphan collections and for backlogs, both for zoological and botanical collections, that we could perhaps give you some advice, because we've been through it once and you've already seen, if you've been through it once, the second time is much easier. So I will circulate that as well, because I think it's important. So thanks for your attention, and I hope you have a few minutes still to grab a cup of tea. Thanks.
Welcome back, colleagues. It's just gone 11:15. We 88 participants in the room, so maybe we'll just give another minute or two. I know that some of the sessions went on a little bit longer into the tea break. So maybe we'll just give colleagues a minute or two. And while we're waiting for colleagues to join, it would be so lovely to, in the chat, just have a sense of how this morning session was for you. So anything from one word to a phrase to a sentence, but just in the chat, it's actually, I think if all of us are feeling very conflicted about missing out on some of the other sessions. We had Sunny says their session was unreal, which sounds wonderful. Unreal in a very cool and good way, I'm sure. Des and I held the space for the Courageous Conversation, which was a very powerful and wonderful session. Sunny obviously was hosting the case study, the transformation case study. Yeah, the innovations group seemed very, very busy and very interesting. I tried to log on a little when we finished our session and you guys were still going strong there in the main room. And also so sad to miss out on the Unsung Heroes presentation. I'm hoping that we can actually catch that on the recording, because I would actually personally love to hear a bit about that. So colleagues, just a few comments. It would be so lovely. Peter Block, one of our gurus around transformation and change, says that it's the small group that's the unit of transformation, but it's that small group in relation to all the other small groups. So it's only when we bring some of our experience back into the main group, back into the whole, that we begin to stitch all the threads together and where we begin to make real change. So comments, just a few comments. Thank you, Siyabonga. These are good words. These are big words. Short words, but big, with big meaning. So we'd love to hear just a few more comments from the, thank you, Ashton. A few more comments from the different parallel sessions. I see we're already 100 people in the room, so I think most of us might be back after tea. We've got one more formal session to go for the morning, and then we have our checkout, our half an hour of checkout. And in our checkouts this afternoon, we're going to have just a quick recap on our photographic exhibition. We're going to have another opportunity to meet in small groups to reflect on today. And then we're going to close today with another spoken word offering, which we're looking forward to very much. Oh, those are nice words, fascinating, innovative, insightful, and safe. Those are beautiful words, colleagues. Beautiful words. So we're going into our second session, and the theme for this second session of the day, substantive session of the day, is very profound. Why our work matters. Why our work matters. And we've divided the slot into two parallel sessions. The one focusing on sharing stories from the different institutions around the research projects, and the other one around the data themes, the theme around data. So research that contributes to answering questions of societal importance, sharing stories and insights from the institutions, and the use of museum natural history data in a changing world, sharing stories and insights from the institutions. So the session around the use of data remains in this main Zoom room. You don't have to go anywhere. You just stay where you are. And am I right? Yes, that's right. For a moment, I got worried, Chanel, when I saw your post there. The colleagues who want to reflect and share stories around research initiatives, research projects, research themes, you're going to be asked to leave this meeting with a red button and to then join the separate Zoom, a new parallel Zoom room with your link for your research session. And then we'll meet back up here again in this main Zoom room at 12:30. At 12:30, we'll meet back up here in the main Zoom room. Remember your three overarching questions that we're reflecting on. How do we create readiness in our institutions for this implementation and transformation process to give life to the manual? How do we support each other, the institutions? How do we make use of what the hub has to offer us? And what is my role in leading this process, making my contribution in the leading of the implementation of this manual? So with that, any other housekeeping? Des, anything from you? Nothing from you? Chanel, any other housekeeping?
No, nothing.
Nothing from Chanel. So with that, so for some reason, Zama says, I'm unable to click the links. Marinda said she's also struggling with that. So I'm not sure, Chanel, how we can be of assistance. So I'm assuming that Zama and Marinda might want to go to the research session.
So if you didn't receive the email with the links, please go to the NSCF website. I'll post the exact link there now. All the forum links are on there. So if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see a tab for day 1, day 2, day 3. So just go to day 3, the second session on day 3. And then those links are clickable.
So let's hope that you find your way there. If not, via, if not in any other way, then via the NSCF website. Those links are live, and clicking on those links should take you into the research Zoom room. Thank you, colleagues. We'll see you back here at 12:30.
Okay, so I'm going to be giving a brief talk about digitization of the bolus herbarium collection, with specific emphasis on our use of the Symbiota platform in our endeavor to digitize the collection or digitally preserve the collection and to create a virtual herbarium. So firstly, I think probably most of you are more familiar with Brahms and Specify. So just a bit of a background on what Symbiota actually is. It's an open sourced web-based content management system for curating specimen and observation-based biodiversity data. And it's not catered to any specific broad group of organisms, so it can be used for fauna or flora. And the system can be used in one of two ways. Firstly, it can be used in conjunction with another database management system like Brahms or Specify, where the data is still managed offline in one of these other database systems, and then a snapshot collection of the database is uploaded periodically onto a Symbiota web portal. So in that case, Symbiota is basically just used as a means of displaying the information on the internet. And then the alternative is that it can be used as an all-in-one database management and virtual herbarium museum system, which is what we're aiming to do at Bolus Herbarium. So just an overview of what I want to be talking about today. I just want to focus on the actual digitization process that we've been following at Bolus Herbarium, and then briefly talk about some of the challenges we've had and the progress we've made so far. And because probably most of you aren't that familiar with Symbiota, I just wanted to also share a few screenshots so that you can get an idea of what the system actually looks like and how specimen records are displayed on it and how it is used to actually manage data. So, as I said, it's a web-based program or web-based software that's accessed through your web browser, in this case Chrome. This is the landing page for our portal, which is pretty bare bones at the moment. But from this page, you can basically search the collection, search the taxonomic thesaurus, or use the sitemap to access various administrative functions. And then the collections can be searched in two main ways. First is in a table view, which I'm not going to focus on today. It's basically very similar to what you would expect in Brahms. It's basically the equivalent of the botanical records file in Brahms. And then the alternative is the list view, which I want to talk about more. So in the list view, you basically have to input certain specific search criteria. In this case, I've searched for Proteaceae. At the moment, we haven't actually done the data migration, so everything that is in the system at the moment is just a test collection. I've got a test collection of 10 Proteaceae and 10 Fabaceae specimens. So yeah, I searched for Proteaceae, and this brings up basically just a list with summary details of each of the specimens. And if you zoom into one of those, it basically just shows summary details, and if there's an image attached to it, it'll show a thumbnail. And if you click on either full record details or the thumbnail, opens up a new window, which then shows the full specimen details for that specimen and brings up the image, the medium resolution web image for that specimen, which if you then click on, can take you directly to the location of that image on the image server, and you can zoom in and out on it in the browser, or you can download the original high resolution JPEG directly from the image server. So that is basically like the endpoint for an individual specimen. I then just wanted to go over the actual process that we've used to get to this point. So basically that starts with photographing the specimens. So we have 4 NSCF RAs at the moment photographing the priority families, starting with Proteaceae and Fabaceae. And at the same time that they take these images, they also capture some basic data about them. So just basically the barcode and the species name in a spreadsheet. And then from that point, the images are diverted to our image server, which is basically a modified Figshare repository called ZivaHub that is managed by the UCT's Digital Library Services. And this basic spreadsheet data that is captured during the imaging stage is uploaded onto Symbiota to create these skeletal records. So this is what the table view for specimen data looks like in Symbiota. And the ones in the red box are basically just skeletal records that haven't been filled in yet. So the next step then is we will get the URLs from the image server, and we then link the URLs to the skeletal records by uploading another spreadsheet into Symbiota, basically with just 2 columns, the barcode or catalog number and the image URL. And then from there, we can move on to fleshing out these skeletal records by capturing the data directly from the images. So then this, I think, is probably one of the things that is most different to Brahms is the actual data editor or data capture page. So I've zoomed out here so that you can see the whole thing. It's basically just one A4 page, not a table view. And if you zoom in normally, that's what it looks like. And then this window on the side, which just contains the image, you can zoom into a particular part of that image, like the label or the date label. And then from there, you can go on to pull out the record. And then the last thing that I wanted to talk about was that in addition, so in the first slide, I spoke about specimen and observation-based data. So in addition to storing specimens, Symbiota also has the option of storing observations, photographic observations of plants or animals that are not linked to any database or barcoded specimens. So within the taxonomic thesaurus, if you select a species page, it'll bring up a page like this where you can add a species description, and it'll show all of the pictures, specimens, and in situ photos of that plant. And so it basically almost sort of tries to emulate like a virtual flora. And then in terms of our progress and challenges so far, so we're still in the process of preparing for the final data migration. And one of the reasons why this is taking so long is that in addition to transferring the main collection, or the main specimen collection, the taxonomic thesaurus, the people database, and the geography database all need to be managed and prepared separately beforehand. So far I've completed the taxonomic thesaurus, which basically involved constructing a higher level taxonomy from kingdoms down to family, and then I imported the basically an extract of the entire Vedanta database. And then at the moment, I'm still working on cleaning up an extract of people from Brahms database, our current Brahms database. And in the meantime, the imaging is ongoing. And then some of our challenges, the main challenge so far has been that the system is basically American made, and a lot of it, especially in terms of the geography, caters for US collections. So there's some additional fields that we don't need, like counties. whereas there's some fields that are quite important for our collections, like the quarter degree square field, which are absent. And unlike Brahms, where it's quite easy to make custom fields, these sort of adjustments in Symboto basically need to be made within the source code. So a lot of these sorts of changes that need to be made are at the moment out of my technical expertise, but hopefully I'll get to them eventually. And then there's also just a couple of other minor style issues and other adjustments that need to be made. Yeah, thank you. That's it.
Thanks, Dean. Okay, so moving on to Bronwyn next. Bronwyn, are you ready to go?
Yes, I'm ready to go. I'm just gonna share my screen.
Thank you. So just for everyone, what we'll do is if you can just save your questions for later, please, and we'll come back to questions and have some discussion at the end. Take it away, Bronwyn.
Okay. Can you all see this?
Got it.
Okay, great. What are you guys seeing right now? Because this thing just shifted somewhere else.
We're seeing the other screen. We're seeing your, yeah, you need to do it the other way around.
Okay, let me just stop this quickly. Sorry, guys. Okay, can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay, great stuff. Okay, good morning, everybody. I am the data quality specialist for the NSCF, and I manage our data capturing and quality control team for our plant section. And today I'll be discussing with you our data capturing and quality control process. Okay, so with regards to our data capturing process, so what we do is we request images from institutions, and if the institutions have images available, they will send it to us, and it's normally done through WeTransfer. We then download the images, and then I will divide the images into batches of 60. So normally the images are named according to the first image in the batch and the last image in the batch, as you can see in this diagram here, and it usually follows a sequential order. And then once the images are batched, they are then distributed to our technicians also through WeTransfer. Now, the reason why we make use of WeTransfer is because we found it to be the best program that allows us to manage the capacity and the size of the images. Okay, once that is done, the file names which you see in the yellow folders, they are recorded on a live Google sheet known as the RDE progress tracker, and I'll explain this a bit in the next slide. So that what the technician does is they record the names of the files in here, and we can it's really been significant, especially during the pandemic, to have this Google sheet, because it allows me to easily manage both the data capturing and the quality control process. Okay, once that is done, then the information on the labels are captured into Brahms. So the basic fields that we capture in Brahms with the NSCF is the collection details, obviously the species name, the locality details, and then the habitat details. Okay, the RDE progress tracker. Okay, so as you can see on the screen, we have the date started. That's just the date that the data capture has started. Then we have the herbarium name that we received the images from. We have the dataset name. That's just usually the name of the project, and it contains the name of the families that we're busy with. The RDE file name, which is just the name of the image folder. We have the data capture, the status column, which is the most important, which I'll explain shortly. And then other fields such as time to capture, just the amount of time it takes you to do a file, capture notes, any issues with the file. Reviewed by the review date is the quality controller's details. Okay. So in progress. So when the data capturer changes the status to in progress, this just means that they've started the data capturing process. Once they are done data capturing a file, they will change the status to for review. So the quality control will come to the sheet and they will see, okay, an RDE file says for review. They will know that they now need to check that specific RDE file. Once they have selected that RDE file for checking, they will change the status to in review. Once they have gone through the file and checked for any mistakes, then they will change the status to for corrections. The data capturer will then come back to the RDE progress tracker. They will see something has been identified as for corrections. They will do all the corrections and then they will change the status back to full verification. This gives the quality control an indication now that they have to go through the final check. And then once the final checks are done, the status is then changed to complete. Okay, the quality control process. So I wanted to give an image of a train and about the quality control process. So in the beginning of the pandemic, we started with a team of quality controllers from PRI, which is the National Herbarium in Pretoria, from NBG, the Compton Herbarium in Cape Town, the Bolus Herbarium from UCT in Cape Town, and the National Herbarium from KZN. So, but obviously with the lockdown levels lowering, our team has obviously now reduced because some of the members had to obviously return back to their responsibilities at work. Okay, so how the process works is that the RDE files and the images are sent to the quality controller. So it will be the RDE files with the associated images. Okay, the quality controller will then check for any sort of mistakes. Okay, the completed files are sent back to me. So what I've decided is that once the quality controller has checked an RDE file, they will send the RDE file back to me. I will send it to the technician, and then the technician, once they are done, they will send it back to me. This just helps to manage both the data quality and the data capturing process at the same time. And then once that is done, once that is done, then the aggregated RDE files, they go through a final cleaning with a program that Ian has built. And this just does the final finished cleaning just to check maybe if there's a zero out of place or anything like that, because we want to make sure that the data that we send back to the institutions is of high quality. Okay, the challenges. So these are just a few of the challenges that I've personally experienced in the pandemic as well. So the first one is obviously network issues, and I'm sure that you all can relate to that. And then the different communication styles as well as the different personalities, I think they go hand in hand because you're working with people from different backgrounds, with different work ethics, with different ways that they communicate. So what I needed to do is try and merge everybody's views and ideas and try to come to a consensus that we can all work together to follow the same process and get the same outcome. And then the other challenge is obviously the too many distractions. I know I've had distractions with kids, and you know, your phone's a distraction, and the number one thing is the fridge. That's a distraction because it's right there in your face. Okay, and then the statistics. So in closing, this is just an image of a few of our data technicians. Okay, so at the start of lockdown until now, we captured about more than 21,000 records. Okay, at the start of lockdown until now, we quality control about more than 18,000 records. And in total, we've captured over 75 records. And I think this is really a great achievement considering all the challenges and things that we've experienced, especially during the pandemic. Okay, thanks everybody. That's it from me.
Thanks, Bronwyn. That guy in your last slide looked like he'd won the lottery or something like that. All right, we're going to go to Siyabonga Zamisa next from the KZN Museum.
Cool. Morning, everyone. It's still morning, yes. So this is Sia, Zamisa, and not Kolisi. So I am the data technician at the KZN Museum, as Ian alluded. So if you can just look at my first slide, that is my rich picture, where there's me in the middle, and those are the people I interact with on a daily basis here at the museum. And I'm just gonna take you through what they're currently doing using the data that I manage. Next slide. Yeah, so there is Elodie, one of our creator for malacology. So Elodie currently uses the data on Specify to query the mollusk species that were collected at the historical Natal Museum dredging program stations. So what she does, she compares this historic data with recently dredged material collected from the same locations or stations. So this not only helps with more accurate information, but eventually give insight into change of the mollusk community over time. Next slide. So that is some of the material collected from her dredging field. Next slide. And this is where they're actually sorting what they collected there. Next slide, please. So she comes back with a lot of data, and then she will put it in Excel file. And then this data set that is to be imported to Specify by myself via a Specify workbench. So what I can just make people aware is one must always make sure that the mappings are done correctly, just to avoid any data mapped into the incorrect field. One can use our NSCF manual to check the descriptions of the fields just to better understand when mapping and what is it that one is mapping. Next slide. This is where we don't allow drinking and dredging. So if you do that, that's what happens basically. Next slide, please. So I'm gonna go to our assistant director, which is John, and just take you through, guys, what he's currently using the data for. So John uses currently our database for plotting distribution maps when assessing species distributions, as well as compiling checklist. Next slide. So if this is a data set from Specify, recently published by myself to GBIF with the help of John and Willem. So John has recently cited it for his new manuscript that is not yet published. And this further promotes the open data sharing access that the NSCF community strives for. Next slide. And that is the occurrence data, GBIF. Next slide. And that data has been cited 11 times so far. Next slide. So I'm gonna go to Kirsten, which is our chief creator here for entomology. So what she's currently doing, next slide, is, so she recently asked me to produce a distribution map for her. So this map roughly shows the distribution of our collected insects in KZN and where actually they were collected. So I chose to show this map without edit so that everyone can see why Ian is always in our case about georeferencing and doing it correctly. So there are a couple outliers to this map which need to be cleaned. And using Ian's new georeferencing tool, one can update the records with the correct coordinate. And it's good to check for such errors in one databases now and then. Next slide. Thank you. So Kirsten asked for the map above. to get a rough idea of the samples, the sample locality in KZN, so as to see which places were undersampled. So since then, she has done a full trip to the Comeback Nature Reserve, and this is your Mellis trap you see in the picture for insect catching, which was mounted at the reserve. Next slide. And that is some of the material that were collected in that reserve. Next slide. So we have another creator at the museum called Igor. He works as a mollusk curator. So next slide, please. So Igor recently did a survey of the net of did a survey at the Intumeni Reserve. Historically, the mollusk collection has 19 species from Intumeni, with a total of 38 observations recorded from 1981 to 2005 in our collections. So despite the fact that Intumeni Nature Reserve has been already thoroughly sampled for mollusks, 13 species were recorded in the results of this survey for the first time. It should also be noted that 10 out of the 19 species previously known from Intumeni were not found during the survey. So the historic data that is found in our database is very important for examples like the one above, which might indicate a loss of certain species or migration and new species that are observed. This is great information for both researcher and the nature reserve. Next slide. So last but not least, we have a collections technician that works under the entomology department. My name is Mandisa. Next slide. Next slide. Yeah, so she's the person I work with on a daily basis. And this slide basically shows new taxonomic updates that are done on our database and also updates that are done depending on what's done, what is needed in that day. Next slide. And then this is your typical loan invoice. So specify, you can also produce such invoices and then you can be able to tag them. So meaning one, don't need to keep files and files of such information and paper. So you can use specify to track such things. And this is where I end. Next slide. And then thank you guys.
Thanks, Sia. All right, straight to you, Christian. You'll share your screen.
Thank you, Ian. I'll you know.
Okay, I apologize. My internet's a bit shaky at the moment, so I'm going to leave my video off. But I'll just give you some perspective of how Christian and I approach herpetology collections that we need to work through backlogs and things like that. And we broke it down basically 4 components that's related to the data we assess. So it's the specimens, the skills, the tools and resources we use to work with the data, and also the last part is where we actually feed in the data into the database and return or consolidate the specimens into the collection. Next slide, Christian. So we broke it down to specimens because specimens is our primary source of information that we work with mostly, and into subtopics that's related to the specimen data. The first one we're looking at is labels, which are our primary source of information. that's used to database specimens. However, sometimes labels are often hard to read due to being damaged or to someone's really bad handwriting. And it makes it difficult for transcribers, especially if you are working against time and things like that. We often find that some of the data are not correctly transcribed, especially dates, names, and collectors and things like that. So it often makes it difficult. You get dirty data. One solution we looked at recently is to move away from writing labels by hand for specimens already accessioned into the collection, and rather use printers to print labels. And we've really tried and errored with different printers, different ink types, different paper types, and at the end I think we got it right. I think there's 2 paper types that's really good, showing really good promise. And we currently in the Port Elizabeth Museum, which we find ourselves, we actually printed all the new labels for all the backlog specimens, and they seem to be holding up pretty well. They look very neat and tidy. The next part of our data is related to alternative catalog numbers. And at McGregor especially, I remember we got specimens with single steel tags with no ancillary information, so you have no idea what data is accompanying the specimen, and yet the specimen is still in very good condition. This often leads us to put on our detective hats and look a bit deeper. Especially, you can quite easily find a lot of these old alternative catalog numbers by just looking at the acronym. And a lot of them are usually American Museum of Natural History specimens that were exchanged way back. So we often go onto other databases, such as the American Museum of Natural History, to track and get extra data that's going along with the specimen, so we can have a complete picture and get as much data for every specimen as possible. Next slide, Christian. So a big thing we often sit with is we sit also with field numbers that's linked to specimens, and some of these specimens are really good or rare specimens that could be used in conservation assessments and things like that. So it's really important to try and find the information. And most of the time, if you're clued up in the field, you can kind of suss out whose field number it is and track it down. Sometimes it's harder to get data from people, certain people than others, but eventually you get the data, and a lot of the times it's worth the wait and worth the while. And another thing is also we often get a single specimen or a bunch of specimens in a single jar with only one specimen with a label. Often these specimens are collected together during the same collecting event, so they share the same information with the other specimens. So we often trace back into collectors' field notes and things like that to update data and things like that. But then again, the challenge is getting the field notes from the collectors themselves. So we really encourage collectors going out on trips to provide as much data as possible, and even maybe copies of the field notes. I know sometimes it's a bit, there's some stuff with people working on new species descriptions and things like that. They might be unwilling to share the data, but the more data regarding the circumstances of how the specimen is collected, things like that, could really benefit future efforts in data curation and linking specimens to one another. Christian, next slide. So the next thing is related to the skills we mainly employ to source the data, and we mostly use our taxon expertise, and then everything coming from there that's related to the data. Because you first need to know what you're working with, and then you go on to the data and the software tools and things like that you use to clean data. So yeah, next slide, Christian. So hiding reptiles and amphibians sometimes are very straightforward. Some of them are easy, some of them are more difficult. The big thing we sit with in herpetology is that the description of cryptic species are very common, some of which are sometimes very poorly defined, and it usually leaves you no way to ascertain 100% identification of the specimens. For example, if you have, there's two different sunfelt lizards, Lucrus ulubi and Lucrus ornata. They basically occur sympatrically across the distribution, and they look very similar. The diagnosable features to separate them are extremely vague, and without the knowledge about each individual distribution, the ecology, underlying things like that, it's extremely difficult to put identification on that. For that reason we use integrative approaches where we bring together the best information we can in terms of like our individual understandings of the species ecology, and also obviously using taxonomic keys to the best of our ability. Yeah, the challenge is often that we sit with frogs is where frogs, a lot of the frogs that's described, especially in the genus Timorterna, they can only be identified by their calls, and a lot of them occur also sympatrically, and it makes it extremely difficult to put a solid identification with a museum specimen without the actual call. That's there again where we're collecting information from the collector's field notes that might have actually heard the frog calling or something like that, might lead to a positive identification. Yeah, so in cases where there's really ambiguous morphological characters between specimens, we tend to retain the original verbatim identification because we weren't physically there to collect the specimen. I think it would be reckless to put an ID on something which you really can't ID without actually hearing calling. Christian, next slide. Then probably one of the stuff that's like takes the most time and that you need to be really focused while doing it is cleaning the actual data. People tend to capture data poorly in general that we've seen, and that's where we need to step in and curate the data as best as possible and dissect as much information into as many data columns in our workbench templates as we can. A big thing here to remember is, or that we employ, is to keep track of every single change and every single record we work with by employing like we add extra columns in our spreadsheet just to track. Yeah, we call it support columns. Add support columns and to track every single change, every single specimen you use it, because things can get quite messy when you're working with messy data. Yeah, and Christian will take you further in the software and the tools that we actually use to automate processes and to work with specimen data and to make sure we produce the cleanest possible data and the most useful data that we can that's related to each specimen. Thanks, Christian.
Thank you. I've got the presentation in front of me, so I hope my mic is on.
Sorry, Christian, can I just interrupt, please? You guys are already on 10 minutes and we've got 3 presentations to get through still. Can I push you to finish in about 2 minutes, please?
Yes.
Is that fine?
100%.
Thanks.
Okay, so basically, when we're looking at tools and resources that we use, we have a variety of tools at our disposal, technological advances, things like that. 4 main ones that we use are Google Sheets, fine, some R programming, and then obviously we can't achieve everything on a computer. We also revert to literature. Now, in terms of Google, some of you might have seen this if you attended our previous session, so I won't spend too much time on this. But in some cases, we have categories or information or columns that provide us with indication of the condition or state of the specimen. And these allow us to create functions or formulas in Excel that assist us with categorizing this data into categories, for example, high quality records that can be cataloged immediately, some that require conditions to be assessed, or others that require improved ID confidences. We also use OpenRefine. And OpenRefine is a wonderful tool, very easy to use. As you'll see here, I'll be cleaning a Chameleonidae record that has been spelled incorrectly. And we use this for dealing with collectors, taxon names, geographies, and also localities. And with a click of a button, I can fix all of the incorrectly spelled Chameleonidae records. In terms of our programming stuff, in the song, we had a problem with correcting taxon names, about 3,174 names. And what we did was we created a list of all the amphibian species, reptile species from reptile database and the amphibian web. And we compared the list with our standard list to flag these records automatically. In terms of splitting concatenated collectors, sometimes all of the collectors are in one single column. And we split that out by using R scripts and stuff. But I have to, throw it to the wind here that sometimes what happens is a lot of people, you try and reinvent the wheel. Many times there's already a tool to do this. And in Google Sheets, there is a tool to deal with this. I think Ian might make this presentation available at a later stage. I'll see I'm over the 2 minutes.
All right. Okay, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
So you just stop sharing. All right, guys. So I'm going to be talking about the georeferencing tool. So what's the problem with the way that we do georeferencing at the moment? Firstly, we have within an institution multiple collections with the same locality name appearing over and over again. That locality name appears in collections in other institutions as well. And you can have multiple permutations or forms of that same locality name appearing within a collection or in different collections in different parts of the country. So when we're doing georeferencing, we're often georeferencing the same locality over and over, which is inefficient. In addition to that, the institutions are georeferencing in isolation from one another, and we don't have standards for the way that georeferencing is being done, or standards are not being used. So what's the solution? My feeling is that the starting point is to treat a georeference as an entity in itself. So it's a particular locality string for a place on Earth and coordinates for where that locality is. And then very importantly, we need an uncertainty estimate for that as well. So here we have coordinates, the little green dot, and then we have a ring around those coordinates, which basically covers the area where the specimen is likely to have been collected. We also need some additional metadata fields like who georeferenced the record and when and how they georeferenced it in order to be standards compliant. If we treat a georeference as an entity like this on its own, it means it can be reusable. To make it reusable, we need to store it in a database. And if it's in a database, we can make it available to all the institutions who can then work collaboratively to do georeferencing. On that note, I'd like to introduce the NSCF georeferencing tool. The way it works is you extract specimen records from your specimen database and you load them into the tool. The tool extracts all of the unique localities from that data set and it groups them into similar locality groups. So these are possibly the same locality or very similar but different localities. And those form the basis of the georeferencing process. This is the tool and this is its landing page. So when you visit the tool, you can either go to your data sets and you can start georeferencing, or you can load a new data set to georeference. Our URL is grf.nscf.org.za. If you click on the datasets button, you get a page like this, which shows you the list of datasets you have available to georeference. The tool is intended to enable collaborative georeferencing. So when you load a dataset into the tool, you can select, you can add people who will help you georeference that dataset, and they will all see the dataset in their list of datasets like this. When you click on a dataset, you get to the actual georeferencing interface. On the left-hand side, you have your list of similar locality strings. These are those localities that may be the same or slightly different localities. In the center, we have existing georeferences which come from the georeferencing database, listed as a table at the top, and they're displayed on the map so you can see where they are. And on the right-hand side, we've got a form which, if you click on one of those georeferences in the table or the map, you can see the details and the metadata for that record, for that georeference record. The way the process works is that you select locality strings from the locality string group on the left. If there's an existing georeference that you're happy to apply to those locality strings, you select it from the middle and you apply it, or you can create a new georeference on the right and apply it to those. There are some extra tools. If you have a locality string that is ambiguous or very imprecise, you can click no georef, and that indicates that that's the case. Or if you feel the locality strings would be better georeferenced by a colleague or someone else, you can click the skip button to go on to the next locality string group. At the top of the page, like I said, this is collaborative. So at the top of the page, you've got these statistics, and these are updated live while you and your colleagues are working on the data set. So you can see as the georeferences are added, and you can keep track of your own stats for the day. Once you're finished with the data set, you can get the data set details page like this, where you have the options to download your georeferenced records again. So that's the tool. It's currently in testing in our team here at the NSCF. And if you would like to have a demonstration, we can organize that at some point. Or if you'd like to use it, please get in touch. And we can look at starting to load some data sets. Thank you. Mahlatse, over to you. And then Marinda.
Hi everyone, I'm Mahlatse. I'm based in Pretoria. Have I shared?
Not yet.
Not yet. Did we that? There we go. Can you see it?
Yes, got it. Thank you.
All right, thanks. So I'm going to share with you my very short journey to NSCF data management experience so far. So how it started is I joined NSCF I think in the beginning of February as a data quality specialist working with museums. And I quickly learned that NSCF works a bit differently. I had to adapt to a couple of internal mechanisms to NSCF. This includes the communication devices like Asana and the weekly meetings, which what's special about them is what is being discussed in those meetings, which is not just the work that we do, but also the well-beings of people involved in that work. And also having a mind shift of how you view data and the processes of processing data using the NSCF manual. And how it's going so far is basically upskilling in terms of databases and programming. So we're going through this phase of upskilling so that we can deliver some of the things that we do going forward. So we started with Access, where we learned the basics of databases. From there, we moved to creating diagrams where you create tables, and the relationship between those diagrams are the basic elements of creating a database, basically. And then from there, we moved to MySQL. Basically, these are huge databases which are holding the data sets that include being used by specified, which is the direction that we are taking where museums are moving their data set into specified. So you need large databases like MySQL. And then from there, we're learning a bit of programming. In that, at the beginning stage of it, which we're learning HTML, CSS, JavaScript. These are the kind of things that are going to help us going forward. And ultimately, how this should end is with an integrated system and protocols among all the museums, so that they work as one unit, including your data management plans, where they should have similar processes, your workflows, your data cleanings, and so those should cut across. It doesn't necessarily have to be the same, but they should cut across. You should feel when you move from one museum to another that the operation is a bit similar. It's one unit. Also standardizing the resources where similar species in different museums are processed the same way. If one specimen is being stored in alcohol containers, then across all museums, the same specimens or similar specimens should be stored in alcohol. You don't find that in one museum they store a certain specimen in alcohol. The next museum, the similar specimen is being stored in a different way. So it should just cut across, including when you're digitizing specimens, should use similar methods across all museums and tissues. So we're standardizing the resources that we use. This will also help maximize the little resources we have. And it also, when the systems are integrated and using similar protocols, it will help us have a larger reach, especially when we work as the same unit. We have a larger reach. We better support research, better support different departments, and most importantly, in ordinary citizens at large, whether it be visiting museums, whether it would be having certain requests, so it will be easier to know what to do when we work as the same unit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mahlatse. All right. Marinda, are you there?
Okay, I'm here.
Great, thank you.
Can I share my screen?
You can share your screen. Just for the group, so there was a little bit of a mix-up at the beginning. So Hester's presentation wasn't in this session. She's presented it in the other session. So for those of you who would like to see it, please have a look at the recording afterwards when that's sent out later today. All right, over to you, Marinda.
Okay, thanks.
We don't have your screen yet.
Do you have it now?
Not yet. There we go. Thank you.
Okay, do you see full screen or all sorts of things?
No, the small screen.
Okay, let's try this one.
There we go. Got it. Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, the flowering plant family project that Peter and Esther and I was working on over the last few years has now, well, our first part of this project has come to an end. We've submitted the manuscript to the publication section, so we're very happy with that. So the plant family project was based on a previous project we've done on the 52 plant families, which was published in 2013. So the new publication covers 241, which is all the plant families in Southern Africa. So we spend a lot of time in taking images, and especially of diagnostic characters for each family. So what I thought is just to give you a quiz, and I'm going to show a slide with 8 different families on it, and you can just let us know in the chat how many of the families do you recognize. Okay, there they are. Okay, let's give you the answers. So how many did you get? Okay, the other question is what do all these families have in common? Did you notice anything that they have in common? Let us know in the chat. So one of the reasons why we did the book is we think it's very important for anyone to have the name of the plant family, whether it's an animal or a plant or anything. Without the name, you can't do any searches, you can't find extra information or anything. So an important place to start in the plants is to start with a family, and then you can go to genus and species. And that was our main driving force to do this project. I also want to relate to you, you know, while we were working on the book, it challenged us in many ways. We had to take a lot of images, so we had to find new ways of taking decent images. We had to work on plant families that we're not familiar with. And to me, one of the most fascinating aspects was working with water plant families. And I spent quite a bit of time photographing them. And I just want to tell you a little bit about one of the plants, one of the genera. It's in the genus Lagarosiphon in the Hydrocharytaceae. On the left-hand side, you see the male flowers. Now, these flowers are really small. They're about 2 to 3 millimeters high. So they float on the water surface, and the wind blows them around from the one side of the pond to the other side. On the right-hand side, you see the female flowers that is waiting on the water surface. And whenever, and then the pollination takes place whenever the male flowers bump into the female flowers. But that wasn't the most fascinating part of this whole process. the most fascinating part of the story is, how do the female flowers rise to the top of the water surface? So what they do is they form an air bubble around the flower, and you'll see on the left-hand side the straight stalk, and it's not reaching the water surface yet. And the plant keep on producing these water bubbles until the flowering stalk has grown into a long enough length so that it reaches the water surface. At first, because I was photographing it, I thought, these silly bubbles, they keep on messing up my photographs. I don't want the bubbles. But as soon you break the bubble, it makes a new bubble. So I sat for many hours just observing this whole process in these water plants, and it was really fascinating. A huge learning curve for us to work with plants in different families. I'm going to try and show you a short video of one of the bubbles. I'm showing it in slow motion because it happens very quickly. So to end off, I hope the video works. Okay, did you catch that one?
It was a bit quick. But this wouldn't be the first video that we've had trouble with.
Oh, didn't you see the video?
It came up, but it was very quick, and I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it started from the beginning, Marinda.
It's not a long video. Let's try again.
Okay. Oh, there we go. That was okay. that was better from my side.
Okay, great. Okay, thanks. I'm glad you saw that, and yeah, and that's all from my side then.
All right, thanks very much. Okay, so I'd just like to say thanks to all the presenters. Thanks for the session. I think we saw some interesting things there. And unfortunately, we don't have time for any discussion because we're going to go straight into the next session, and we're in the main Zoom session here. But yeah, thanks to all to everyone for coming, and I hope that was useful and interesting. And please get in touch with any of the presenters if you have any questions or if you'd like to discuss things. I'm going to end your screen sharing.
Ian, just to say that the other group, I've just got an SMS from Chanel that the other group is running a little bit late. Okay. So while we wait for them, we probably have another few minutes while we wait from them if anybody wants to ask a question or wants to post a comment.
Thanks. Okay, does anyone have questions? Questions or comments? Feel free to shout. Okay, Christina, go for it.
My question to Marinda is, when will the book be available? Will there be an electronic version? I know way back there was talk of having it as an online book. Or of course, printed ones would be fantastic for teaching as well, but online as well. So yeah, just a bit more questions about the book. Thanks.
Thanks, Christina. Yeah, we are very proud of you guys using the book. So when Sifiso told us, was it yesterday or the day before, how he's using the book. So yeah, thanks a lot for that. the publication process is, the wheels are turning very slowly. We have, yeah, of course we will hope before the end of the year, but there's no clear indication from publication section when it will be done. But parallel to that, we also in discussions to develop the contents of the book into a app that everyone can carry around on their phones. So yeah, we're holding thumbs for that process, and I think, you know, whichever one comes first.
All right. There's a question for Christian about historical literature. I think you ended before you got into that, Christian. Do you want to use the opportunity?
Yeah, indeed. Thank you for the question. Yeah. Now, we focus a lot, you know, on solving problems with data. You know, a lot of times we use tools, as I said, like programming languages and stuff like that. But many of the times we actually find very interesting information that give us context about where specimens were collected and when from historic literature. By finding, you know, publications of catalogs and stuff, for example, for McGregor Museum, that was published in 1908. We were able to identify localities, found a coordinate that we could use to identify this particular space, and also get information about collectors, you know, who certain collectors were. You know, a lot of the historic text is not always available, but once you start looking on places like biodiversity, heritage library, and those areas, you do find very interesting information about that. And again, that just enhances the records. So there's a lot of information in the historic text as well.
Great, thanks, Christian. Loki?
Hi, Jan. Yes, I'm quite interested in the georeferencing tool. What's keeping it from becoming sort of, I don't know, infinite again? I mean, the same localities with different error margins. Is that all saved as new localities? Is that all saved as new reference points? If you understand what I'm saying, you've got an error margin for every single set, but that error margin might differ quite a lot depending on your data set and depending what you know about it. So yeah, I'm just wondering about the practicality of that, to sort of store the error margins alongside the locality point.
So the idea is that, you know, there needs to be some kind of georeferencing protocol in place, and the protocols specify how you estimate that uncertainty. So if you have something that says, for example, 12 kilometers by road southeast of Bloemfontein, there's a protocol for working out what the uncertainty is for a locality string that says that. It's, you know, you can't, if you're using a particular protocol, that's going to be the uncertainty estimate. So the idea is that once someone has georeferenced that locality string and there's a record for that in the database, anyone else who picks up a locality string like that in their own database would simply reuse that same georeference. They would just select it and say, this is the same one. It's basically a gazetteer. That's the thing. The database is basically a gazetteer, except the difference being that it's got all the extra stuff that you need in order for something to be a georeference and not just a locality name.
Okay, and this will be open for everyone from sort of when?
Yeah, always the question of when. So like I say, we're busy testing it at the moment with our team, and things are going quite well. So I'm expecting probably within the next few weeks, we'll be able to sort of start opening it up to the broader community, just to carry on with testing. I think the important thing is that at this stage, what I'd like is for people to have a chat to me about loading data sets into it before they get started, just to make sure that they understand the way that it works and you know, the way that it should be used. But yeah, so you won't be waiting too much longer. So within the next sort of few weeks or say month or two, I'll be ready to get it out to people.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Loki. I see we're 110 people back in the main room. So I think most of our colleagues from the Research Parallel session has joined us again. Ian, just to alert you, there's some question about georeferencing tool hooking up with the Sanbi Gazette and so on. So maybe there are one or two things that you just need to respond to just to close off that session.
Yes, I'll respond there. Do you want me to respond to it verbally?
No,
or
I
in the
think
chat?
no, on the chat would be great.
I'll do that.
Yes.
Thanks. Okay.
So as somebody who really didn't think she would ever in her entire life sit through a data management session, ever, that was so fascinating. So thank you so much to every presenter. It was so fascinating. Your slides were so amazing. Your stories were so fascinating. So thank you very much for a wonderful session. And welcome back to our colleagues. I'm sure you had equally wonderful and interesting presentations and conversations. I think you also experienced the time as very tight, which is wonderful. It's wonderful to know that we've got more and more and more to talk about. So any comments, just reflections in the chat about your session, just one word, just a phrase, just to cross-pollinate our experiences of the two different sessions. So if people from the data session could just put one or two comments, reflections into the chat. What struck you most about that presentation? What are you most excited about all those presentations? What are you most excited about? And the same for the colleagues from the Research Parallel session. Just a reflection, just a word. Yeah, so it feels like it's been a very, very rich morning. It feels like it's been a rich morning. So we've come to the end then of day 3 of our forum. And we've got 3 things that we want to do by way of checkout, and it is almost going on just past 20 to 1. So Fulu, if you're ready, I'm going to hand over firstly to you just to give us an update on the photographic competition. And then if we've got enough time, we are very keen, Chanel, to just break for 10 minutes into small groups to do a reflection on the day, just an opportunity to meet some new colleagues again. And then in the last 2 or 3 minutes, few minutes of our day, we have another spoken word offering, another beautiful poem honoring our ocean, Mother Ocean, to end off our day. So Fulu, just over to you.
Ilse is doing the photo competition.
Ilse is
today.
doing it.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ilse, over to you.
Thanks, Ilse and Fulu. Hi, guys. So just give me a second to share my screen here. Just hold on. Share screen. There. Okay, can we see? Can everybody see?
It says screen sharing, but we haven't, yeah, now we can. There it's up on the screen now.
So we have the 4 categories which have all been uploaded, and now people are free to go and vote. You have until, I think, 11:30 this evening. If you haven't already voted, please go through. All you need to do is you can come and vote for an image out of 5. We'd greatly appreciate it if you could vote for all, if you can find that time. Once you have started, it will automatically save an update on our side. You are fully welcome to make comments. If you want to view the information of an image, you just click on the little R and it will bring it up. It can be a bit annoying, so just like push the X and it'll go away. You also have options to view it in full screen if that suits you. And then, yes, so this is what we have on the iconic images so far that have been uploaded. And then we had a few for beautiful. So there's a few added from yesterday. Unfortunately, if you entered your image into multiple categories, we had to make a call and enter it into one. So there may have been one or two people there. Sorry, now this is getting away. And then we have the funny ones.
Sure.
And that's about it. So if you have any questions, let us know. If you'd like us to pop the links in the chat again, we can do that. But you should find them in Fulu's letter that she sent yesterday.
Thank you, Ilse. Thank you very much. So there's a request to please reshare the link on how to vote for the images. So Ilse, if you could just do that, if you could just post that in the chat again, the link for where to go to vote for the images, which you can do straight after the session. Fantastic.
You will see there are 4 different links for each category. I will pop them in the chat, and otherwise they are in Fulu's newsletter from yesterday.
Fantastic. Thank you. So Chanel, if you could throw up the checkout slide for us, the questions in the checkout slide, and just take a note from it. Just if you can just take a note of it. We're going to go into groups of 3. So this is another opportunity to meet a new colleague. I'm so hoping that you're going to have an opportunity to maybe meet a new colleague that you haven't had an opportunity to speak with, if the Google algorithms do their thing. So please introduce yourself. What did you enjoy most about this morning? What are you sorry you missed out on? And one thing you can take away from today back to your institution. One thing you can take away today from today's session back to your institution. So those are your 3 questions: what you enjoyed, what you missed, and something you can take away. So we'll be in groups of 3 just for 10 minutes. And we'll be back here at 5 just to close off with a poem from Sipamandla. Thank you, Chanel.
Thank you, Ilse. I'm opening the rooms now. Just click on the pop-up that comes in up on the screen and you'll go to your room.
So I see we've got about 26 colleagues still in the main Zoom room. So you just have to hit on the join button to join your checkout group. You should be in a small group of 2 or 3 people just to have a mini reflection on today's session. I think Mr. Babaza has really been struggling to connect the whole day. I've actually seen his little icon struggling to connect. If anybody is struggling to get into their checkout group, just put your video on or just unmute yourself or put a message in the chat. So we just have to assume that the colleagues that are not in their small groups have a reason for not joining their small group, and not that you are stuck. If you're stuck, please alert us and we can still get you there. There's still a good 5 more minutes to share with somebody in a checkout room. Sipamantla, if you can hear me, could you check in with us? I just wanted to check with him that I'm pronouncing his name correctly. Sipamandla Mceleli. So Michelle is having some technical problems on her side. So it's not our side, fortunately. Des, do we want to alert people to the closing ceremony? Do you want to say something about that?
I've got something. I've written it in the chat. So I will just press send when the moment comes. But I think that at the end.
So we don't have to say anything. You're happy to for it to go into the chat?
I will say something. Maybe just say, please read in the chat, and this is what we're expecting.
Okay, cool.
But right at the end.
Okay.
So after the poem,
I
will thank him, and then I will share what's for tomorrow.
Perfect.
What we need.
Perfect.
Okay.
Chanel, we can give them another 2-3 minutes. I don't think the poem will take too long. So maybe a bit more time in the groups. So I would say if we can just bring them back like a minute or so before, minute or two before 1. So it's 12:56. Okay. Yeah, it's 12:56 now. So give them another sort of 3 minutes.
Okay.
Maybe you can give them their 1 minute notice now, Chanel.
Okay, will do.
Welcome back. Streaming in through the ether. Welcome back, everybody. As Des said before, always so lovely to see faces when we come back from our small groups. There's something about having encountered somebody else that leaves its mark on our faces. Soft smiles, soft eyes. It's always beautiful. So the links have been posted in the chat for the photographic exhibition, so you can look at that if you need to. And I see we're on 77 participants, so we'll just wait a few more minutes and then, or a minute or so, and then we'll have our closing spoken word. So Sipho, if you're around, if you can just be on standby. I know you've had this very interesting sort of icon on your screen. So I hope you are with us to give us our our closing poem for the day. It will be in isiXhosa. There you are. Do I say your name correctly? Sipamandla, do I say it correctly?
Yes, you're pronouncing it right. Yes. Yes.
And welcome. And your poem is entitled Ocean. And you're going to do it for us in isiXhosa. But will you introduce yourself and will you just say something about your poem before you deliver it to us?
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Sipamandla Mceleli. And I'm an intern at SciEb. I wrote the poem when I was entering a competition for Youth for MPA, and they were having a session where they wanted people to honor the ocean and the animals within it. So the poem is titled Unolwandle, as in the female name in isiXhosa. Like we have ladies that are named after the ocean, and their names are Nolwandle. So the poem starts off addressing how she is beautiful and how much other people appreciate her beauty, how much she brings to people's how much she purifies people's brains, thoughts, and everything, and the fact that the ocean also feeds people, and it also helps them with feeding them not only with food but information in terms of research, and but with a slight twist in it. There's change that's happening, that everyone knows that there's pollution, and pollution comes in different forms. So the very same people that are polluting the ocean are the very same people that look down upon the ocean and say that the ocean is supposed to be able to clean itself out, or take out the pollutants within the ocean, and they don't care that much about it. So as part of, I think, the second last stanza, we talk about such things, like I'm addressing such parts where people are making fun of it, and then with time, towards the end, we try and make sure to tell the ocean that the ocean lady to calm down and relax, just because before the ocean had helped so many of us become able to research about the ocean and how it functions. So now we are here to help the ocean help itself. So
Wow.
that's I think it's the last stanza in it. The last stanza states that we are all here. We, as the people that have been able to get information about you or do research on you, we are here to help you out. So keep calm and be cool, and let us fight for you.
Oh, beautiful. We can't wait. Beautiful. Thank you. Over to you. Thank you.
Yes. Nolwandle mntwanam, hlala uhleli uhlaziyekile, kuba uluntu nento zalo luyakudinga. Uninzi lwethu luncuma lubobotheke lakukubona. Ntombi ecoca icoce namachwabe, kuba kaloku akukho lungu lamzimba lingabalulekanga. Baninzi besiza kuwe begula bakufika baphile, bambi baza kuwe behangaza izisu zincamathele emqolo, bakufika kuwe ubondle bona nosapho lwabo. Ungumfundisi kwabo balambele imfundo, kwabo bafuna ukonwaba ululonwabo. Oh, kodwa ntokazi enhle efana nesibhakabhaka, kwazi bani sona sifana nawe. Baninzi banenzondo, kuba kaloku wabohluthela izinto babezixabisile. Uhlekiwe ngokungakwazi ukuzihlaziya ngabo bakuhlohla ngentlenga imihla ngemihla. Bangaphelela apho bakuphalalisa wena nosapho lwakho olo belufudula buhlwempu. Zola nolwandle sukulila. Thoba umsindo kulomaza wakho. Ithemba nenkuseleko yakho ibeke kwabo wawungumfundisi ntsapho kubo bona bayaziyo imbaluleko yakho. Zola nolwandle mntwana wam, sikutiyeke sikuthuthuzele, siyeke sikuthethelele. Nolwandle, oh nolwandle mntwana wam. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sipamandla. That was beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you.
You can hear some ululating in the background. Yes, beautiful.
Beautiful. Thank you. So as that was a lovely ending and so appropriate. And so just one last thing for tomorrow. We would like to close our forum in a kind of a fun and meaningful way. So I've just put in the chat, we would like you to bring something from nature, your home, or work as a symbol of what you love. So it could be something that you wear, something that you hold in your hand, something that you show, a picture or anything. It could even be a person or an animal, a pet or something special that you love. So tomorrow we look forward to seeing you do that in the closing round. Have it ready and have it quite close to you. Okay, thanks everyone. And Sipamandla, thanks for ending us off on that wonderful, beautiful note. It was really very special. Thanks. And have a lovely afternoon. I feel like I want to go to the sea now, put my feet in the ocean. So thank you, everybody. Have a good evening. Well done.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Where are the ululators?